So before we take this out to the track, I'm going to replace the power connector because I don't use that connector. I much prefer the XT60. These are cheap, really good tool if you haven't got them, wire strippers. You can adjust how far down you want to strip by sliding this little fella here, so the amount of space there is how much wire you'll have. Then you just put the wire in, done, and it spits out the coating when you release. So that's what just came off it. I hope this lighting's okay. Now I'll stick heat shrink tubing, which you can buy in packs. I'll give you a link if you haven't done this before, but here's a typical pack of heat shrink tubing. If you've used it before, you won't need to worry about what I'm about to say. But heat shrink is kind of like a rubber, and when you apply heat with a heat gun, it shrinks that rubber onto the wire. You can see it's kind of, see if you can see that, it's kind of shrunk down onto the wire, so it kind of sticks to it. You can actually get it off with effort. I won't bother, but it does come off if you try. Now, when you're soldering, another tip if you're unaware, I always use an extraction fan, but I'm not today because I'm just trying to get this this camera nice and close for you. This stuff here is really invaluable. It's just like a steel wool kind of thing. Not the same as washing up steel wool though. You dip your solder tip into it and it comes out nice and clear. Before you solder, you always want to tin your wiring. I trust you can see this. What I might do, just to protect this pretty model, is to stick my silicone mat, pull that off, stick my silicone mat over, that's better. You can still see that, I hope. So step one for preparing to solder is to tin your wire. So you want to get the solder to flow. Another thing I might do is I use flux. You can get a big bucket of it. You can get it in a pan as well. It's this goop that allows solder to flow. One little trick I do for when I'm out and about, so not here really, but once you get flux on your wire and you apply heat, it flows right through the wire. So now the solder will be drawn up right through it. I'm just blowing so I don't have to breathe this. Usually my exhaust fan pulls it up. It's largely harmless because what's coming off here in smoke is actually flux. So now the solder has gone right through the wire. That's now considered tinned. T-I-N-N-E-D. Now we're going to do the same on this side. I'm just going to put it on where the flux is, and that flux, gee, I hope you can see this, I'm really sorry if you can't. The flux will help draw the solder through the wire, all the way through it. And when you tin your wire, it makes your soldering so much easier. I'm just going to add a bit more solder. What you basically end up with is a solid block of metal rather than a bunch of wire strands, which makes it perfect for soldering. It makes your soldering job way easier. So now I've just cleaned the tip on the end of the steel wool. Now I need to grab an XT60 connector. So here's my XT connectors. They come in 30, 60 and 90. XT90, so called because it's useful for 90 amps, or rated for 90 amps. Now your batteries use the female, so we want to put the male. That's the XT60, and for reference, that's the XT30. I haven't got any male 90s, or I'd put that next to you. Anyway, we want the 60 today, although we're going to be using the 30 battery to keep it the same for my comparison. You can make your own converter, which is what I've done. So what you do is, on a nice flat workbench, not this kind of workbench, is kind of like with the wire, I like to stick the soldering iron into it and poke some solder into it, and then that makes it all nice and silver. This is positive. on the flat side. Then I put the pre-tinned wire into it. This is hard to do for camera, but I've just started my channel, we're going to get better, and I feed it a little bit more solder. You don't want to hold it too long, and I've held it much too long already. It's worked because I've tinned everything, but it's a bit sloppy. Anyway, a good soldering join makes everything look all molten and shiny and chrome. Yeah, this has come out really nicely, but I've just not let it move until it dried, till it cooled. So now that's nicely set, I will set up a better camera system for soldering in future. Anyway, now your heat shrink will sit right over that. If you do it while it's still warm, which I've been a bit slow on, but it is melting, that'll hold itself in there while I solder the other side. So that's positive done. Now we just do the same for the negative. So we throw some solder into the XT60 connector and it will spread and become all nice and silver. And while it's still hot, then I like to poke the wire into it. This is really difficult. I'm sorry about this lousy angle, but I just wanted to show you how I do it. You add some heat and it all gets all slick and chrome again. And I would then try and just fill the rest of that join with solder, not to make it bulge out, but just to make sure that you get a really good connection. And then make sure there are no rough edges because they will break through your insulation. Now that's the soldering done. That's completely fine. It was awkward because of how I've set up the camera, but it's quite effective. Then you get that in so that there's no metal showing at all. Because it's still hot, that's melted down. Don't forget to turn your iron off. Then hot air gun. Any temperature from about 250 will work. Mine's on 350, but it doesn't really matter what. The key for this stuff, particularly if you work on electronics, is not to hold the soldering iron against the workpiece for long at all. Now this is already melted because the metal contacts were hot. We're hot enough now. So we'll just go over it and that melts it in. And that, my friends, is done. The other thing I'd like to do sometimes is I'll have an additional connector. I'll have an on-off switch on one of these wires and it'll have a female again there, not for comps because you say it's weight, that you might end up zip tying it like that, and then you've got your on-off switch here that you can just toggle so that even if it's plugged in, you can have a master off switch. Some of my models have it accessible from just under the side of the body. Anyway, that's the soldering side of things done. I'm going to stick this tube back on because, like I said before, the top inch of the wire is where the signal is received, so you want that to stay nice and high. This is ready for a battery.